And I should note, this is from July 1, 2009. UC's academic senate leadership from the very beginning was interested in maintaining academic standards rather than lowering them. Now, as a result, the audit report draws a number of erroneous conclusions about the qualifications of non-residents based on this erroneous definition. Perhaps the most serious of these is that UC is admitting unqualified or less prepared non-residents to the university. I again quote from their report, page 24. On a variety of academic indicators, the university has admitted thousands of non-residents who are less qualified than the upper half of the residents it admitted. The language referring to the upper half of residents admitted, again, draws directly from the outdated master plan language. In addition, the audit report focuses on just two indicators, grades and standardized test scores. As I mentioned earlier, under UC's comprehensive review admissions policy, the university incorporates 14 different factors in its review of freshman admissions. To be sure now, GPA and standardized test scores are important, but they're also limited. For example, as we related to the auditor's staff on numerous occasions, GPA in particular is problematic to use when comparing students across the USA and internationally, since grading standards and criteria may differ. Now, to address these complexities, each UC campus has on staff individuals whose job it is to keep track of how school systems calculate their GPAs and to use this knowledge to interpret the meaning of the GPAs that students actually submit. In contrast, standardized test scores from out-of-state and international students are far easier to evaluate. Unlike GPA, the score UC receives is comparable by virtue of the fact that these represent a consistent and uniform achievement standard that students throughout the world must meet. In the packet of materials distributed earlier, I believe Display 6 provides average SAT scores for residents and non-residents concerning the same 10-year period and in the same format that was provided in the audit report. As you can see, by this more consistent measure, non-residents in most cases have higher qualifications than California students. This information was made available to the auditor's office. That said, the university measures student accomplishment on 13 other factors. We do not, indeed I may not, as a matter of policy, reject any student on the basis of a single criteria. This means that you will see variations in quantitative metrics among residents and non-residents. That's to be expected when other countervailing criteria are at play. I would also point out that a key part of our policy is to admit students who do well when they get to the University of California. In fact, across the board, you see freshmen from out of state earn higher GPAs than their California peers, and their California peers are also quite superior. So the admissions process that we have is yielding students who come to our campuses who thrive. Now, of course, we take the Academic Senate's compare favorably policy and we review it seriously, and we review UC compliance with that policy every year. We agree with the auditor's report that admissions data for residents and non-residents should be publicly available. The final contention that needs to be addressed is the following. Why do non-residents have greater access to the campus of their choice compared to residents? Again, quoting from the report, page 33, the university admitted fewer residents to the campuses of their choice over the past several years. Now, it is true that competition for admission has increased for all students applying to the University of California, no question. This is understandable. We've had 12 straight years of increases in applications, while state funding to support enrollment has not grown commensurately. The auditor's report implies, however, that while some California residents are not getting into their campus of choice, most non-residents are. In effect, concluding that non-resident students have a better chance of being admitted over California residents. There's no evidence to support this. The admission rate overall for California residents is 71%. For non-residents, it's 55%. That is, nearly half of non-residents are denied at every campus they apply to. Nor do non-residents have greater access to more campuses. In fact, the data show otherwise, as shown, I believe, in Display 7 of your handout. At every level, California students have the advantage. They are more likely to be admitted to 2 or more campuses, 3 or more campuses, et cetera. Now, a key point about campus choice is what happens after a student receives a notice that he or she has not been admitted to a campus to which they have applied. For California residents, unlike out-of-state residents, UC guarantees a place for them in the system through our referral process. There's been a lot of talk about this, so let me be very clear. once, and this is the referral process, this is our guarantee, once all admissions decisions have been made and we know the disposition of every application, UC goes a step beyond for Californians. First, the university ensures that every qualified Californian found a home in the UC system. If some did not, we compile a list. It has the name of every eligible Californian who applied and who is eligible. Each of these Californians is then contacted individually. They will be asked if they would like to attend UC at a campus that has space for them. In recent years, that has been UC Merced. Let me emphasize, and I need to be very clear about this, there are no out-of-state or international students on this list. A number of media reports have suggested that some or even all non-residents are guaranteed admission. Again, I want to state categorically that is not the case. I'm coming in for a landing, believe me. Perhaps the most disheartening finding from the report is its dismissal of UC's guarantee for California students as somehow inauthentic, reasoning that since a small number of admits take us up on the offer, it can't be very valuable. But that assessment could not be more wrong. Over the past 10 years, UC has enrolled nearly 4,000 additional California residents through our referral system. Now, other colleges and universities would have simply denied them. We admitted them. They accepted our offer, and every one of them had an opportunity to earn a UC degree. Listen, my role as an admissions professional is not to make every kid I admit come to my campus. I hope they do. That decision is the decision of the student and the student's family. Now, let me also be clear on this as well, because I think the auditor makes a very good point. Our goal should always be to admit as many students as we can to their first choice campus, the campus they want to go to, no question. And I can tell you, though, that the best way to do that is to fund enrollment growth for California residents. Just consider the preliminary outcomes UC has reported already for this year. 8,500 more California residents were admitted to at least one of their campuses of choice. And I haven't even finished with transfers yet. In a year like this, we expect the referral pool will shrink as well. And that is a great outcome. So I agree with their recommendation in the sense that we want to make the referral pool more attractive. You do that by shrinking it. Finally, where are UC's transfer students? I want to highlight for you something that was not included in the audit report. While the report spends considerable time criticizing the university's treatment of freshman applicants, there is no discussion of community college transfer students. Yet transfers constitute about 1/3 of our incoming classes. The transfer pathway, as you know, is one of the master plan's most triumphant innovations, providing access to the baccalaureate degree for thousands of students who want and deserve a second chance at a four-year degree. It is one of the reasons why the university has so strongly advocated the Transfer Pathways Initiative, which provides a common set of course expectations for UC's 21 most popular majors. And yet, the state report ignores these students. The exclusion of community college transfer students from this report is a significant omission. These students are a critical part of our mission and our service to California, and the vast majority of them are California residents. So, thank you. The auditor, I think, raises really important questions for families and prospective students throughout the state, and I hope Nathan and I have been able to address at least some of your concerns raised by the report, but of course we're pleased to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your report. Members, I just have two questions I'll ask really quick, and then I'll open it up to my colleagues up here. So obviously the state auditor said she used your data and information to support her findings and conclusions, and the university did not identify any factual errors in the auditor's report, preferably page 91, 92, and page 105. So I'm having a hard time understanding how you can take an issue with the auditor's findings and conclusions if she used your data and you did not identify any factual errors. Can you explain or elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would say that a couple things. I mean, there were things, I think the staffing growth is the one that is the most egregious. As we spent a lot of time, we prepared a white paper specifically on the growth in staff and salaries, because this had come up many times. In fact, Mr. McCarty and I had talked about it last year. UC staff did grow, and it grew by the numbers that the auditor cites. However, 72% of that growth was at our medical centers, and it was driven by nearly a doubling in size of their operations. The staff that was funded and the salaries that were funded on our core funds, that is from the state and tuition, went down by 17% over that time. We shared the white paper with them. We spent a lot of time with them, and they chose to omit that. So I would say that's one where we don't have a disagreement about the numbers they put in, but just the conclusions, which I think are misleading and egregious.
The next question is on your Straight Talk hot button issues that just came out with the some changes you want to do. I'm just curious, was this report scheduled to come out as soon as it did, or was it just as a result, as you know, the audit was coming out and there were some issues that were going to be brought forward?
Well, I would point out that every year we put out what's called an annual accountability report, and most of the material that's in this smaller version is drawn directly from the annual accountability report, which is not only a physical report, but is also on our website. So it was, and this was also material that we had shared as part of the audit. So it was things that we drew in to show, some of our differences with the audit report.
Okay, thank you. I think I have Senator Allen. You had a question?
Well, there's been so much going on, and I really want to thank Assemblymember Nazarian for suggesting that we have everyone together, because the amount of he said, she said happening here is pretty extraordinary. I've got you guys saying that that on all test scores factors that there is that we're admitting less qualified students, and yet at the same time on the SAT scores, at least the chart that's presented by the University of California, it certainly suggests that that's not the case. Now, I understand that your argument, you're looking at students who are being admitted who are under the average, whereas what the UC is doing, I would posit that what they're presenting is a little more appropriate for this particular question, is the system-wide average scores for resident students versus non-resident students. And according to that, and please tell me if you disagree with this, because if you do, then there's a fundamental difference in understanding of the basic facts. But what they're saying is that the average non-resident student has an average SAT score of 150 points higher than the average resident student. And that what you're doing is by focusing so much on GPA, you're not recognizing the fact that there are considerable differences from state to state to state with regards to the way, with regards to GPA and the way they're calculated, et cetera. And that the true kind of nationwide metric that we ought to be using is the SAT, because that's the same test from state to state to state. So I'd love to hear your answer to that.
Real quick, if you don't let me. State Auditor, did you already see that report of the SAT? Just wanted to make sure if you've seen it prior to today's meeting.
No,
so this is new to you as well.
Yeah. So one of the responses, and I'll have staff assist, that's why we chose to look at a variety of different tests. We included, and certainly we have a table that talks about GPAs, but I want us to go back to the 16,000 students that we talked about in the last 3 years that were admitted to the UC system, and across the board, SAT score, ACT score, and GPA, every single factor, they scored lower than the average, the median score for a California resident who was admitted. This information, we'd have to look at it, but you're criticizing or questioning, and UC is questioning, the one table in the report that focuses on GPA. The information on that table that I think is particularly important is the trend that you see. This isn't just a one-year thing. When they changed the standard to compare favorably, and we have the actual language, and we'd be happy to share that with the committee, as far as the language prior to was very clear that it said it was the upper half. But the reason we looked at all of the scores, and the table that Ms. Fullerton referred to earlier, we were looking at a variety of different measures, and the measures that the UC used each of those years. So when we're looking at those 16,000 students that were admitted in these last 3 years, when compare favorably was established as the standard, you see all of those students have lower quantifiable scores on SAT, ACT, and GPAs.
When you say all of which students?
All of the 16,000 students that we identified in the last 3 academic years that were admitted to the UC, non-resident students that were admitted to the UC system. So they're showing you, and again, I haven't seen this, they're showing you SAT scores across the board for several years. What they're not pointing out is, because they changed their standard, more and more non-residents are being admitted to the UC system whose scores are lower than this. Their SAT score, their ACT score, and their GPA are lower than these averages.
Well, of course, an average is always an average. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I completely sympathize with the confusion is there. I was completely flummoxed when I got the report and saw that and didn't see the SAT scores. We sent them every piece of data available. They were in our offices for 9 months. So to argue that they don't have the data seems a little disingenuous. But secondly, I would argue this, and this is very clearly, the 16,000 are based on a definition nobody uses. The 16,000 students that they identify is in effect using a definition. It's not in the master plan, and it's not as part of the faculty sentence compare favorably. Let me go a little further with that. Compare favorably was put in place so that we would in fact have greater guidance for our campuses. Before, the master plan guidance was just for the university writ large, the whole university. But as the university has become and gotten more competitive, more selective at some of our campuses and not others, you can't really apply that across the board. So what the Academic Senate wanted to do is say, no, we need to have a standard for every campus. And compare favorably simply says, if you're going to admit a non-resident, that non-resident better be as qualified or better than a California resident. For me, and I think for Californians, that's pretty clear guidance about what our obligations are. The final thing I'll say is that they didn't look at a variety. Sorry.
So what you're saying is that if we were actually to break down their data by campus, we understand that within the 9 university system, there's quite a bit of diversity in terms of competitiveness from one campus to the other. And that what they're doing effectively is saying that they're looking at the scores that, you know, for let's say an out-of-state student who may have been admitted to a less competitive campus, and then, you know, putting that up against the statewide average, which is unfair because, you know, right. It doesn't reflect the relative competitiveness from campus to campus within the system.
And even the definition that they use, which is to use the upper half of the admitted pool for every campus, operationally doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. I mean, if I'm to look at the upper half of Berkeley, say, where the average GPA when you're coming in is over 4.0, I don't know what the upper half of perfect is. So we have to use these other measures. We have comprehensive review. That's why we don't just rely on numeric measures, because in fact they take us to places we really don't want to go. We want to see the full individual and all of the talents they bring to the university.
Right. So I mean that seems to be a real error in the report. My only pushback to you, sir, is that you know I know you keep coming back to this idea that you know that the upper half is an improper kind of thing for them to keep using. You know, that may be technically correct given the directions in the law, but I do think that it's the sense of the legislature that, you know, we shouldn't be looking at as qualified. We should be saying more qualified when we're opening up spots to out-of-state students. You know, as you know, there are plenty of people who want to apply, and so I would, you know, as someone who likes the UC a great deal and has some trouble with certain aspects of this report, I think, you know, with all due respect, that you're hanging on a technicality that I don't think reflects the will of and the interest of the legislature when it comes to admissions.
No, and I would completely agree. And in addition, I think that's why I didn't want to have an arcane discussion about master plan requirements. That's why I think the faculty were interested in going to a standard that's far clearer. And I completely take your point that if we're going to bring in non-residents, they need to be more qualified.
So a couple points here. One of them, let's talk about compare favorably. So the compare favorably statement, and this is a statement from the policy. It just says non-resident domestic and international students admitted to.
Where are you referring to?
This is from the June 2011 policy that Mr. Handel referred to earlier.
Okay.
Non-resident and domestic international students admitted to a campus should compare favorably to California residents admitted to at that campus. In its letter to the university board,
wonderfully vague language. I love it.
Yeah, well, before the master plan was clear, and you know, let's just go back to the master plan language. So, and I'm reading through a strike-through version, but it says non-resident domestic international students should demonstrate stronger admission credentials than California residents students by generally being in the upper half of those ordinarily eligible as stated in the master plan. So the language is clear. There's a difference between the two of them. One says upper half. The other one says compare favorably. Mr. Handel argued at one of our exit conferences that that language sounds the same. It doesn't sound the same to me, and it doesn't sound, it's not the same words. Why even change it if that was the case? The second point, going to that this document provided additional guidance, the document itself, and this is, again, quoting from it, Boars believes, however, that campus professionals are fully capable of making appropriate judgment calls and leaves the term confer favorably to their interpretation. This isn't additional guidance. This is saying to the campuses, you make the decisions, you interpret it. We trust you. You make that interpretation.
Right, but according to their SAT data, ultimately they are complying with the spirit of that.
So I do want to address that.
And the fact that you guys haven't seemed to have seen the data, I mean, that's just mind-boggling to me.
We have seen the data. The table that we referred to earlier that Ms. Fullerton went through with Mr. Roth, Senator Roth, that shows that over time the SAT scores and how they're being used have changed. The format of those have changed. It's very difficult to do this type of comparison if the SAT scores have been changing over time. What we did instead is we looked at GPAs, and that's on table 5 of our handout. We looked at GPAs, and what we saw.
How have SAT scores changed over time?
No, the SAT tests have changed over time. The format of the test have changed over time.
They're standardized. They're standardized.
That's why we have these.
But it's the same. But don't you agree that it's the same SAT test given in California as it is in Nebraska every year?
That's true. But what we wanted to do.
So then the disparity from year to year is what matters between residents and non-residents.
What we wanted to do, though, was we wanted to look at things that we can compare within a year and over time. GPAs have not, the process for the GPAs are generally the same. So we compared GPAs over 10 years, and we saw after the compare favorably policy that instead of non-residents having higher GPAs than residents, that non-residents began to have lower GPA scores on average than all residents. If this premise of GPA scores are different state by state and they're hard to measure, we would have seen a hodgepodge of red on this table instead of this red just starting to occur in the 2010-11 academic year.
Sorry, which chart are we referring to?
It's table 5 in our handout.
Okay, so walk us through it.
Okay, so it goes campus by campus, resident, and then non-resident domestic, because the university asserted to us, and we agreed that there's issues measuring the international non-resident test scores. Yeah. So you look in 2005-06, the first column of data on the left. In all cases, they're both shaded the same color. Mm-hmm. Non-residents, shaded blue, non-residents are having higher GPA scores on average than a resident. But beginning in 10-11, academic year 10-11, we start to see some of the campuses where non-residents have lower GPA scores. And beginning in 12-13, it becomes more widespread. And by academic year 13-14 and 14-15, in all cases except for Merced, the non-residents have lower average GPA scores.
So what's your response to this?
Well, I'd be grasping at straws. What's happening, of course, across this is arithmetic. What you see here is increasing GPAs for both residents and for non-residents. Now, what you'll also note as well is, yes, we did go after non-residents out of state and internationally as well. That's a very competitive group, and because they're being recruited by institutions all around the world. So we see a consistency across that pattern as well. But then take a look again at the differences here. And this is at the heart of the argument that we made with them before. There are variations, but even the differences they note here are fairly absurd. Because what we've got here are different GPA calculations across the United States and across internationally. Regarding the 16,000, they use a median. A median is 50% above and 50% below. But I reject all the 16,000 to start with because we use 14 criteria to evaluate students. You're going to see variation in strictly numeric qualifications. That's true. They do not speak to the additional criteria that we use in their report. So I can see where this gets a little bit confusing, but keep in mind we need to step back. that we don't run our applications through a machine.
Right.
I don't look at just GPAs and SAT scores. We have these other factors as well. But even if you accept the data, even if you accept Table 5, one needs to also then look at the SAT data and say, well, wait, these students, in fact, are competitive, more than competitive, to come to the university.
Okay, but there does seem to be a
Real quick, Senator, do you have a couple more? I just want to get a couple other members because we're coming up on time here. We have 20 minutes left, 25 minutes, if we can cut it short.
Okay. Well, there's so much here, and I'm really having trouble, reconciling some of the very different information that's being presented to us. I guess I understand we have to cut off, but it is my understanding. I know you go back to the master plan, which is appropriate, but is it not true that the University of California is very much complying with its responsibilities under the master plan to accept the top eighth of high school students from within the state of California?
As we say in the report, if you include the ones in the referral pool, yes. When you take the ones out from the referral pool, the ones that didn't enroll, it drops below the 12.5%. And one minor clarification.
That's always been the case, right?
No.
No.
And we disagree with that analysis. We're actually probably accommodating more like 14.1%, and we gave them that data as well.
But when you take out the referral pool, it drops below that. One point that I like to make is that the 14 items in the comprehensive review that Mr. Handel refers to, the only ones that can be quantified are GPA and test scores. The others you can't quantify, you can't measure those. So we had to do something at that point, as opposed to a full detailed admissions document review.
If I could add to that, it's a really important question because they do raise. That's a very important.
Okay, if we can go ahead and let that cease there, we can go on. I have Assemblymember Baker, Nazarian, and McCarty members. Can you have the question go through me as chair of the committee before we just start having everybody start scrambling?